Hi guys, today I'm going to be reading Thank You, Mr. Falker by Patricia Polacco. Let's get started. The grandpa held the jar of honey so that all the family could see, then dipped a ladle into it and drizzled honey on the cover of a small book. Then the little girl had just turned 5. "Stand up, little one," he cooed. "I did this for your mother, your uncles, your older brother, and now you." Then he handed the book to her. "Taste." She dipped her finger into the honey and put it into her mouth. "What is that taste?" the grandpa asked. The little girl answered, "Sweet." Then all the family said in a single voice, "Yes, and so is knowledge. But knowledge is like the bee that made the honey sweet honey. You have to chase it through the pages of a book." The little girl knew that the promise to read was at last hers. Soon she was going to learn to read. Trisha, the littlest girl in the family, grew up loving books. Her school teacher mother read to her every night. Her red-headed brother brought his books home from school and shared them. And whenever she visited the family farm, her grandfather and grandmother read to her by the stone fireplace. When she turned 5 and went to kindergarten, most of all she hoped to read. Every day she saw the kids in the first grade across the hall reading, and before the year was over, some of the kids in her own class began to read, not Trisha. Still, she loved being at school because she could read, draw. The other kids would crowd around her and watch her do her magic with crayons. "The first grade, you'll need to read," her brother said. In the first grade, Trisha sat in a circle with the other kids. They were all holding our neighborhood. Their first readers sounding out letters and words. They said b, oi, boy, and look. The teacher smiled at them when they pulled out all the sounds together and got a word. But then Trisha looked at a page and all she see were wiggling letters. And when she tried to sound out words, the other kids laughed at her. "Trisha, what are you looking at in the book?" they'd say. "I'm reading," she said back to them. But her teacher would move on to the next person, always when it was her turn to read. But her teacher had to help her with every single word. And while the other kids moved up into the second reader and the third grade reader, she stayed alone in our neighborhood. Trisha began to feel different. She began to feel dumb. The harder words got for the little girl, the more and more time she spent drawing. How she loved to draw, or just sitting and dreaming, or when she could. Going walks with her grandma. One summer day, she and her grandma were walking together in the small woods behind their farm. It was twilight. The air was sweet and warm. Fireflies were just coming up from the grass. As they walked, Trisha said, "Grandmama, do you think I'm different?" "Of course," her grandma answered. "To be different is the miracle of life. You see all of those little fireflies? Everyone is different." "Do you think I'm smart?" Trisha didn't feel smart. Her grandma hugged her. "You are the smartest, quickest, dearest little thing ever." Right then the little girl felt safe in her grandma's arms. Reading didn't matter so much. Trisha's grandma used to say that the stars were holes in the sky. They were the light of heaven coming from the other side, and she used to say that someday she would be on the other side, where the light comes from. One evening, they lay on the grass together and counted the lights from heaven. You know, her grandma said, all of us go there someday. Hang on to the grass, or you'll lift right off the ground, and there you'll be. They laughed and both hung on the grass, but it was not long after that night that her grandma must have let go of the grass, because she went to where the lights were. On the other side, because she went to where the lights were. On the other side. And not long after that, Trisha's grandpa let go of the grass too. School seemed harder and harder now. Well, what he's talking about is that her grandma and her grandfather died. And it's just hard for her because it's just so sad. In school, she's just so sad about her grandparents, and it's harder for her now. Reading was just plain torture. When Sue Ellen read her page or Tommy Bob read his page, they read so easily that Trisha would watch the top of their heads to see if something was happening to their heads that wasn't happening to hers. And numbers were the hardest thing of all to read. She never added anything right. Line the numbers up before you add them, the teacher would say. But when Trisha tried, the numbers looked like a stack of blocks, wobbly and ready to fall. She just knew she was dumb. Then one day, her mother announced that she had gotten a teaching job in California, a long way from the family farm in Michigan. Even though her grandma and her grandpa were gone, the little girl didn't want to move. Maybe though the teachers and kids in her new school wouldn't know how dumb she was. She and her mother and brother moved across the country in a two-town 1949 Plymouth. It took 5 days to get there. But at the new school, it was the same. When she tried to read, she stumbled over words. The cat ran. She was reading like a baby in 3rd grade. And when And when her teacher read along with them and called on Trisha for an answer, she gave the wrong answer every time. "Hey, dummy," a boy called out to her on the playground. "How come you're so dumb?" Other kids stood near him and they laughed. Trisha could feel the tears burning in her eyes. How she longed to go back to school to her grandparents' farm in Michigan. Now Trisha wanted to go... Now Trisha wanted to go to school less and less. "I have a sore throat," she said to her mother, "or I have a stomach ache." She dreamed more and more and drew more and more, and she hated school. Then Trisha started 5th grade. The school was all abuzz. There was a new teacher. He was tall and elegant. Everybody loved his striped coat and slick gray pants. He wore the neatest clothes. All the usual teacher pets gathered around him: Stevie Joe and Alice Marie, Davy and Michael Lee. But right from the start. It didn't seem matter from Mr. Falker which kids were the cutest, or the smartest, or the best at anything. Mr. Falker would stand behind Trisha whenever she was drawing a whisper, "This is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Do you know how talented you are?" When he said this, even the kids who teased her would turn around in their seats and look at her drawings, but they still laughed whenever she gave the wrong answer. Then one day she had to stand up and read. What she hated. She was stumbling through a page in Charlotte's Web, and the page was going all fuzzy. When the kids began to laugh out loud, Mr. Falker, in his plaid jacket and his butterfly tie, said, "Stop! Are all of you so perfect that you..." Stop! Are all of you so perfect that you can look at another person and find fault with her?" That was the last day anyone laughed out loud or made fun of her. All except Eric. He had sat behind Trisha for 2 whole years, but he seemed almost to hate her. Trisha didn't know why. He waited by the door of the classroom for her and pulled her hair. He waited for her on the playground, leaned in her face, and called her Toad. Trisha was afraid to turn any corner, for fear was Eric would be there. She felt completely alone. The only time she was really happy was when she was around Mr. Falker. He let her erase the blackboards. Only the best students got to do that. He patted her on the back whenever she got something right, and looked hard and mean at any kid who teased her. But the nicer Mr. Falker was to Trisha, the worse Eric treated her. He got all the other kids to wait for her on the playground or in the cafeteria, or even the bathroom, and to jump out and call her stupid or ugly. And Trisha began to believe them. She discovered that if she asked to go to the bathroom just before recess, she could hide under the inside stairwell during the free time and not have to go outside at all. In the dark place, she felt completely safe. Trisha was sure Mr. Falker believed that she could read. She had learned to memorize what the kid next to her was reading, or she would wait for Mr. Falker to help her with a sentence. Then she said the same thing that he did. "Good," he would say. Then one day Mr. Falker asked her to stay after school and help her wash the blackboards. He put on music and brought out little sandwiches as they worked and talked. All at once he said, "Let's play a game. I'll shout out letters. You can write them on the board with the wet sponge as quickly as you can." "A," he shouted out. She wiped a watery A. "H," he shouted. She'd made a watery 8. 14, 3, D, M, Q, he shouted out. He shouted out many, many letters and numbers. Then he walked up behind her, and together they looked at the board. It was a watery mess. Trisha knew that none of the letters or numbers looked like they should. She threw the sponge down and tried to run. Last page. The rest of the year became Odysseus. I don't know how to say that word. Discovery and adventure for the little girl. She learned to love school. I know that because that little girl was me, Patricia Polacco. So that means it was a true story and she didn't know how to read. I saw Mr. Falker again some 30 years later at a wedding. I walked up to him and introduced myself. At first, he had difficulties placing me. Then I told him who I was and how he changed my life so many years ago. He hugged me and asked me what I did for a living. Why, Mr. Falker? I answered, I make books for children. Thank you, Mr. Falker. Thank you. That was a book. It was pretty good, right, guys? I love you all so much. Bye, guys.